The answer lies in the heart of battle. And Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova podcast. This is Kyle Hebert, the voice of Ryu from Street Fighter. Hadouken!
All right, and welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova, coming at you with another interview. And in today's, I'm going to have the honor of having the one, the only, Thomas McCall of 13am Games. And he is the CFO and the lead designer for 13am Games. So you guys would be familiar with this company with games such as RunBow, Pirate Pop Plus, and the most recent and phenomenal game, Double Cross. Now, if you haven't played Double Cross, I highly recommend you go and pick it up. It's currently on sale on the Switch for about $15 for a limited time as well. But definitely go and pick this up. This game, it has so much going for it. If you love brawlers, if you love old school side-scrolling action, adventure, Metroidvania type of games that take it to a new plateau, then this is exactly what you need to play. So with that being said, if you guys are ready to do it, I'm ready to do it. Let's go ahead and welcome Tom onto the show. Welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova, and I have the honor and the true privilege of having the one and only Tom McCall of 13am Games. It's just, my mind is blown right now that I have you on the show. But Tom, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. As Mekel mentioned, I do design, I lead the design team at 13am Games, and yeah, that's actually pretty much it. I don't know where I was going with that second part.
Oh man, it's truly an honor to have you on. Like this.
Thank you so much.
This is amazing, and you know, I love your games. I love RunBow and Double Cross. You know, I know we're gonna get into that later on in the podcast, but I have been saying to a lot of people and on social media, that is in my top 10 of 2019. That game is just. I got hooked, and I was live streaming it, and I was hooked. I didn't want to play it down, but
awesome.
The game is definitely amazing. But yeah,
thank you so much.
Tell us, you know, about the company. You know, where can people find you guys, like your social media links and everything?
I think we're on Twitter and Facebook at 13am Games. There's also our website, which is 13amgames.com. Where you can find a whole bunch of info about RunBow or Double Cross, where to find it, and all that good stuff. RunBow's pretty much on everything at this point that I can think of, except maybe PS Vita, or definitely not PS Vita. Sorry, I don't know why I'm saying maybe. And Double Cross is out on Switch and PC, and it came out this week on the 10th.
Yeah, it's literally 3 days ago.
Yeah, it's been crazy.
So, tell us about yourself, Tom. Like, what are some of your hobbies and interests, or things that you like to do that you know? Let's peel back the veil of mystique and get to know you.
I'm a pretty easygoing guy. Besides, obviously I play a lot of video games in my free time. In terms of the studio, I tend to be the person that plays the most, I would say, competitive games, or like your AAA bigger titles, compared to there's a lot of indie games that get played in the office. But I play things like Destiny 2, I'm pretty into right now, things like League of Legends. I just booted up or just purchased what's it called, Monster Hunter World, which I'm excited to get into. I used to play WoW forever. Basically, or StarCraft at some point too. So those kind of like any game where there's competition, any game where I can play with my buddies, who I usually play a lot with, and then big MMOs are always a big fun. And besides that, I currently am playing in 2 D&D campaigns, one which I am the Dungeon Master, and the second which another member of the studio, Unai, is the Dungeon Master. And we play that kind of like bi-weekly, I would say.
Cool.
Yeah. And then, standard stuff, friends and all that stuff, downtown Toronto, but those are like the 2 main things.
What's Toronto like? I haven't had the chance to ever go there.
I mean, I've heard it's really nice. I'm originally from a place called Sudbury, which is 5 hours north of Toronto. It's a smaller, like maybe 130,000 people or so. It's kind of like a big small town. So Toronto for me was like it's like a big city kind of thing. I'm warming up to it. It took me a bit. There are certain things about living like in a downtown core that is very different than what I used to like, almost like rural, so to speak. So like a lot of the outdoor activities or just being able to get away from people I miss, but being able to walk anywhere and like just being in the center of things down here in Toronto is really awesome. Like there's always something to do if you're inclined, so that's nice.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
because I was gonna say, like, for our viewers and listeners that are out here in Hawaii, I mean, we only know 3 weather types: it's hot, and hotter. So like anything else, we we're always interested in what the weather is like, because I mean, the weather here is it can be bizarre at times. It can be pouring rain and the sun is out and there's no clouds, and you're like, how does that happen?
Like, what the heck?
Right.
Yeah. Toronto in terms of like weather is it's not so bad. I mean, obviously Canada has a reputation for winter and snow, but there's actually not a ton of snow in Toronto since I've been here. It usually doesn't start till you're a bit farther north, but it gets cold. Like it was like minus 20 degrees Celsius today, which someone can do the conversion on that for me, but it was chilly.
Awesome. All right, and so I know you say you like to play games like Monster Hunter World. Like, are you playing that on PC, PS4? Or
PC.
PC? Okay.
Yeah. I do predominantly play on PC. I mean, it's going to sound strange as someone that develops games for Switch and a lot of Nintendo platforms. Like, I just got a Switch for Christmas, so I just crushed through Breath of the Wild like over the holidays, and I'm probably going to pick up Celeste next because it keeps getting recommended. But yeah, I do. Most of my gaming is on PC.
Nice. Actually, since you mentioned Breath of the Wild, that's actually I'm going to have a couple of voice actors from that game on here. The voice of Rivali, Zelda, and I think 2 or 3 other main characters I'll have on the show eventually within the next week. So that's going to be pretty cool. But yeah, like Breath of the Wild, that game, like I feel like that game absorbs you into it once it gets its claws. Like,
yeah, it's just like, I mean, as someone that like designs and stuff like that, it's just they do such a good job with making sure that every little piece of that world and every little thing is like, it's just polished to like perfection, and it all matters. Like, it's this weird, like every system kind of folds into itself really, really nicely. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, but there's always progression happening, and it might be like in different ways that you're not expecting, but like everything you do is useful, even if it's not the most useful thing you can be doing at the time.
Yeah,
it's just really nice how everything's so integrated in, but also so free at the same time. It's they did a really good job with all that.
Yeah, and it's really amazing how, like, I know a lot of people, back when I was reviewing it, a lot of people were complaining that, there's not a whole lot of story. And I'm thinking, this takes me back to the original Zelda and even A Link to the Past, where the narrative was more in the exploration than anything else. And I think maybe that's something that's lost on a lot of the newer generation because they're growing up with narrative-focused games, but
right.
The exploration, the freedom to do whatever you want to do and explore how you want. Like, there's literally, the limit is your imagination and your stamina for climbing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like, it wouldn't, to me at least, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to have a heavy emphasis on narrative if the important thing in that game is like kind of non-linearity. Like the fact that you can go and do whatever you want in whatever order at any time, it kind of like makes that really hard to write a narrative that makes a lot of sense. Like games that have very strong narratives, like, you know, Last of Us or Witcher 3 or what's the other one I'm forgetting? Uncharted.
Yeah.
Like games like that where and God of War, like they all typically have like a pretty strong narrative, but that's because they string you from A to B to C to D. You know, it's just like you go through what they want you to do. Witcher kind of less so. Witcher's a bunch of little mini instances of that. But yeah, I think Breath of the Wild sacrificed some of that narrative stuff to just give you the freedom to be like, oh, you're like, you just got out of the plateau. You want to go fight Ganon? I mean, you can. It's like, if you really want to, go ahead.
And it's like the power-ups, the power-ups and the things you can do with the hieroglyph thing that you have. It's just that game was. It is funny. Okay, so here's a quick story. Like my wife and I actually got married the day it came out. That was our wedding day.
Oh,
so
wow.
Our honeymoon, we actually spent 2 or 3 weeks both just playing Breath of the Wild. We were like, how far did you get? Did you discover this? Like the game was just
that's awesome.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I keep trying to get my fiance to play play it with me, because I mean, I think she'd like it, and the Switch makes it so easy to just be like, here, just try this.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. So what got you into gaming and becoming passionate about gaming?
I mean, since I can remember, I've always just really enjoyed games in general, not just like video games, but I mean like card games or like sports. Like when I was in high school, for example, I was on like all the sports teams, and that was the big thing I did, while also playing games every night. Board games, card games, anything that has like competition or anything where you have to like think about it for a bit. Like I like that kind of stuff. So as a kid, I gravitated towards games. My parents kind of tried to resist buying a console for as long as they could, but eventually they kind of conceded. And I think my first console was actually just like a PlayStation 1, which is like I missed almost 2 generations of console. So I don't have that big retro log like a lot of other people I work with do. And then from there, I mean, I just loved it, played a bunch, would play with all my friends and stuff like that. And then as I grew up, that didn't really go away. Played a lot of Halo 2, was a big one for me. Got to like a very competitive level of Halo 2, where it was like meeting up on game battles and like playing against people that I know ended up being in like the MLG tournaments and things like that.
I don't even think this generation understands how monumental Halo 2 was back in the day.
Oh no, they don't appreciate it at all. They're like esports is like no. Back then it was like that was it. There was like StarCraft happening in Korea, and there was like Halo here, and that was it. And then Call of Duty eventually caught up, but like there were a couple of years where it was just Halo 2.
Yeah,
it was great. And then started playing WoW and things, but I actually didn't pursue it as like a profession or like an idea of like I can do this for a living until probably like midway through university. So my degree is in civil engineering, structural engineering.
Oh wow.
So I was about, what was it, like second or third year, where I'd done a couple co-op placements and worked a couple jobs in the industry, in the civil engineering industry, and I was like, like this is like I can do it, but it's not really for me. Like I'm not clicking with it for some reason. In all fairness, I probably didn't give it too much of a chance, but in one of my last co-op placements, I got a job at a indie studio here in Toronto that was doing mobile games, and I got a job doing QA testing. And so that 4 months there, I was doing that kind of thing, and it was just like the atmosphere in the studio and like the people I was working with. Like it was nice to be able to go into an office and be like, "Oh, did you guys, you see like Diablo 3's stupid release?" Or like, go and talk about those things, because that was about the time. It was just like way different than talking to like 40, 50-year-olds about their son's hockey game. Like it was just a different environment entirely that I really loved. So once I graduated from that program, I was looking around for like, oh, maybe I can go like spend a year, just go do a college program for game design and just see how it goes. Because like now's the time to do anything. If I don't do it now, it's going to be way harder to do when you're like 3 years into a job.
Yeah.
So kind of bit the bullet on that, did that. Ended up at George Brown, which is where I met basically all the guys I work with now. And then that's basically the story of that.
Wow. That's
it's an interesting one. It's a bit of a leap when people are like, oh, like, you have a civil engineer? I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, what do you do now? I'm like, I make video games. They're like, what?
It's so funny. Like, I'm assuming we're around the same age. I just turned 30. But
hey, you're about a year above me. Yeah.
Okay. Close enough. Close enough proximity. But my nieces and nephews, they're in their early 20s or late teens, and they will talk to me and they'll be like, oh, uncle, like I'm interested in doing this, but I feel like I need to go to college for this, and I keep telling them, like, hey, you never know. Like, it's good you have something on, a skill set or something on paper, but you never really know what's going to happen, in a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. It's really hard to plot out everything. Like, I have a degree in communications marketing, and I work as a systems analyst for a hospital. I do the telephony and the servers and all that, and I tell them that I'm like, I do that for a career, and I also do journalism and reviewing games for companies as a passion. I'm like, but I never went to school for it, it's good having a degree, but you just never know. I mean, you kind of take life as it comes. So.
Yeah, like there are. I mean, my pool of experience might be a little different because I know that at least the people I hung out with in university, like pretty much all of them are doing civil engineering now, which is good because it means that they did the right thing at the time. But I mean, I know a ton of people that took something and migrate to something else, or because realistically, like at the end of high school, you're still becoming who you're going to be, and you have no idea what you're actually going to end up wanting to do, or what jobs are actually going to be a thing by the time you're, that 4 or 5 year time between like starting a university program and finishing it. Like, it's just whatever. And it's always less about, unless there's like super hard technical skills like computer sciences or like math, for example, like you should probably go and do that if that's what you want to do. Yeah. But most other things, it's like you learn the soft skills tend to be more important, or just the ability to like teach yourself stuff seems to be more important than any of the things that you learn in university themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
Or who you meet. That's also true.
True.
That's a big one.
You guys should definitely open like a studio out here in Hawaii. Like, I think the last video game studio we ever had out here was actually Square Enix up until I want to say, was it the early or mid 2000s is when they actually relocated their studios. Either, I think there's one in LA or in California in general, but yeah, it actually used to be in the same building where I work, like on the 29th floor. It used to be Square Enix there, and it's like, holy crap. And I know Hironobu Sakaguchi of Final Fantasy fame, he actually lives out here on the west, well, not on the west side, on the east side in Hawaii area, and the guy who created Tetris is out here too. And I'm like, that's awesome. You guys should open a studio, because there's a lot of people in Hawaii that are really interested in video game design, but it's the how to get into it or how to start is the part where it's like a lot of us out here, we're like, we don't know how. So
it's tricky. It's not an easy thing to do. And like to start a studio, like one of the things that I think a lot of people looking from the outside in wouldn't appreciate is like the amount of varied disciplines you need to make a game. Like, it's not just game design. It's game design, it's programming, it is visual arts, it is graphic design, it is audio design, it's audio itself, narrative, like storytelling, business, like you need business people as well. You need people that are going to go out and do networking, that are going to go and look for deals and whatnot, because at the beginning of a studio, if you're just planning on releasing something and making a hit, it's like, well, good luck. It's a risky thing to do. You can try it, but like there's just so many different facets that you would need, or so many key personnel that need to know what they're doing in order for it to really work. That always seems like the biggest hurdle looking back, is like how lucky we were to kind of just have those people at the start of all this. But yeah, no, living in Hawaii sounds much better than, looking outside right now into the gray cold that is Toronto. I mean, Hawaii sounds lovely.
I mean, you would definitely love it out here. Like I said, we got 3 weathers, hot, and hotter, but sometimes it gets less hot, around the 75 to 78 degree range. But typically it stays like, I want to say like 83 to 84 on average. But then you got the humidity that can make it feel like it's over 100 degrees.
Fahrenheit to normal units to Fahrenheit? Okay, yeah. Okay, I get what you're saying. I had to do the conversion because I never know Fahrenheit. Oh, yeah. Okay, 30. Yeah, that's warm. Damn.
But let's see, that's one of the buses that comes by. I can edit that out. No, never mind that. But definitely, man, like especially like depending on the type of food you like we have just about everything out here, especially the area around Waikiki and University of Hawaii. It's just so much. If you like ramen, there's this place called Agu Ramen. I swear, I tell everybody that I have on my show about this place. It's called Agu Ramen. For about 15 to 20 bucks, you'll get a whole like platter of everything. Like you got spicy ramen, you'll get chicken kodori, you'll get gyoza. It's so good. And it's like a little hole in the wall, and a lot of people.
You're making me hungry.
I know. Like if you ever come out here, especially if you come out to Oahu, definitely you have to go there. It is so good.
I'll remember that.
But yeah, like see, I could rant about food forever. I'm such a foodie. Especially like my condo is in the middle of everything. If I want pizza, there's a pizza spot. There's subs, there's wings, there's local Hawaiian food, Korean food, Japanese food. There's just everything in a 2-mile radius of where I live. So
yeah, that's the one thing I love about being in Toronto. It's the same thing. It's like Thai food, Indian food, Italian. It's like whatever you want. It's somewhere around here. That's always great. Now I'm really hungry.
Right? Oh man. So like, I know we spoke a little bit earlier about you were informing us about like the process of making games, but can you go a little bit more into that? Like, what is the process? Like, the steps that are to be taken, like, when you're coming up with the idea, and then all the way to the process of creating it. Like, what all goes into it?
I mean, it varies from studio to studio. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. What we do, and this also changes, like, how we did Double Cross was drastically different than what we did for RunBow. And what we're working on now is going to be drastically different than both because, we're learning going forward. But excuse me. Usually, obviously, you start with someone has an idea or a concept. What we do is we typically set out some constraints if we know any. Like, for instance, we know it has to be a Switch game. And we know that, like, for instance, our studio typically is stronger in like 2D stuff than 3D because that's where our skill set lies. So like we kind of list out a bit of these constraints and then we say, all right, everybody go like brainstorm some ideas or what have you. And you can play within these constraints or not. Like it's up to you, like whatever you think is best. And so give some time for that. People come back. We pitch the ideas to each other, talk about them a lot, and eventually try to kind of like come to an agreement on something that we should start working on. And when that starts, depending on kind of the scope of that, we usually try to get to like a gameplay prototype, like what we call them, like a white box, which just basically means bare bones. You have a character, you have whatever the core mechanic is working at whatever kind of like early stages you can get it working at, and you basically just play through that, see if there's something there, like if it's actually fun, and if everyone kind of gives a thumbs up or like agrees to it, you either continue on or like you make adjustments. And then the basic cycle is you try to set goals for what we call like iteration loops. So the first would be like, say, I'll pull an example because it's kind of tough to talk about everything because each one has its own little thing. But I'll talk about levels because like that's predominantly what I do. Okay. So start out with well, what are the levels, like, what's the main mechanic, and what kind of mechanics could we have in the levels? And you kind of, what complement them, or how could the core mechanic be elevated or amplified by level mechanics, and what would they be? So you kind of brainstorm a bunch of level mechanics, start grouping them together to things that kind of work together. While this is happening, like narrative team and the art team are talking about where the setting is and whatnot. So you're constantly talking to them to figure it out. And then eventually you kind of get the shell of what a level could be. Like, for instance, with Double Cross, it's trickier because it didn't start out clean. It was kind of changed very differently from what it started out to what it is now. But it's like, we decided, like Gootopia is going to be a universe, right? We have a couple of interesting ideas that involve something that could be skinned like a goo or slime or something. So let's do that. Let's zone in on that. Let's make that a thing, and let's group these level mechanics together. Let's start working on them, and then once you have like the core or like a basic thing working and playable, you start kind of like, we usually do it on paper first. You draw out like basically the blueprints of a level, beats, things like that. For instance, like you've played a bit of Double Cross.
I love it.
or a lot of it. But the Gootopia level Slimy Mire, that was kind of like the first. Was not the first. Caravan was technically Bone Crackle Canyon was technically the first level that we made, but that got overhauled like 6 times.
Oh wow!
Slimy Mire was the first one that kind of like from conception to completion kind of followed this roadmap the most cleanly. But basically it started out like I drew a paper diagram of like, you're going to be above the ground here, then you're going to go underground here, and you're going to be above the ground here, then you're going to be in the canopy here, and then you're going to be below the ground here, and and like basically a roadmap, spacing of checkpoints, kind of like how the core mechanics would start building on each other. Like, when do we introduce acid? When do we introduce the absorbing? I think we call it absorbing goo. It was called something else. I'm trying to remember what we call everything in the final game, because while we're in development, everything has different names because you don't know what everything is. So like,
I think it's the absorbing goo.
Yeah, absorbing goo. So we used to call that swallowing slime, because it would like envelop the player, and there was actually mechanics that would like carry the player away and do other fun stuff. And the level's just called Swamp. So whenever I say Swamp, I mean Slime and Mire, because we just called it Swamp.
Okay.
And so you kind of lay out the beats of the level while the programmers are making the mechanics. Once they're done, you start laying it out with all your different tools, like in the level editor, and then you just start playing it. You get enemies in, and you just keep playing it. And basically, you set a time that you're going to work on it and try to get like a new pass done. So you get like first pass, which has no art in it, no enemies. It's just to see how long something would take if you could just run through it, and with the core mechanics, and are they working? And then that's done. Cool, check mark. Now you start adding in some basic art, you add in some enemies, and you do the same thing. Okay, cool, check mark. Next loop is a little more polish, add a couple more mechanics, tweak all the things that are not working, or add things that people are suggesting, and kind of does that until eventually you end up with a fully arted, fully designed, fully tested kind of level. And then you bring it to QA to like see if you can break it more than you already have been. So it's quite a process, and then like it's hard to put it all into words, because obviously there's like different things happen at different times, and you may not work on that level in one chunk, and your team may be bouncing between 6 different things, and it's like, oh, that's done, okay, this means that this week I'm going to go work on that because I'm blocked on this other level I was working on. So it's a bit of a process.
Oh wow.
That's
and see, and I think a lot of the fans probably don't understand that process, and this is really informative. I'm really grateful that you're sharing this with us.
I'm trying. It's tricky because like the way I'm saying it, I feel like maybe I'm coming off as like a little confusing and rambling, but it's even worse while you're doing it. like it's even less. It's like building the ship as you fly. And obviously, I mean, we're still a pretty new studio. We only have 2 titles out. So I think like other studios or people that have more experience in the industry, they've got this. I would imagine that they have this system ironed out a little bit better. And I mean, we're getting better at it too. Like the stuff we're doing now, and some of the other projects that we're working on for the future seem to be a little more like, we get it now. We know how to kind of work this out.
Well, I mean, you guys have put out, what's considered a cult classic with RunBow, and I'm more than certain that Double Cross is going to be up there with that, because this
we hope.
it's really amazing. You guys are really good with what you do. Like I for for a newer studio, you guys are really amazing. Like that's and that it makes me want to ask, like, tell us a bit more about 13 AM Games and like how it came to be. Like, how did you guys create it?
So as I was mentioning back when I was explaining kind of how I got into games, we all met at George Brown's post-grad game design program. That was where the 10 founders of the company, or nine founders of the company, 9 founders of the company all met originally. And I mean, the class was about 13 people, but 9 of us moved on to start the company. And I mean, the TLDR, like the short version, which is still going to be pretty long, is we signed up to do a game jam, which is you make a game in 48 hours at like the college will host it or some
48 hours.
Yeah, so you come in on the weekend, like it's like starts on Friday and ends Sunday after like Sunday noon, usually, and you just work on trying to make something like playable, basically something fun, something playable, and people come and they work for like all hours of the day. They stay up all late, and like it becomes like a bit of a like. I don't know if you've ever been to like conventions or whatnot, but like, or like esports tournaments or like just game tournaments in general. But it kind of like there's a sense of community and people come and it's just a lot of fun. But we originally just made what would become RunBow in that first 48 hours. So I think you can actually still go on and download if you go to like Global Game Jam 2014. You can probably find like an early EXE of what RunBow was after those 48 hours. But like we made it. It was kind of local multiplayer, so we had people coming around, playing the game, having a lot of fun with it, and we kind of like after this was our first time kind of like creating something as a group and like showing it to people, and we had pretty good feedback. So we're like, hey, maybe we have something here. So we spent a little more time, polished it, signed up for a student showcase here in Toronto called Level Up, where like a bunch of different colleges and programs come as student teams and they show off the games that they've been making. And we brought it to that, and there's judging that goes on. Like there's a couple categories you can win, like best art, best tech, best design, blah blah blah. And we brought RunBow, and we ended up winning best design for it, which is like cool. Like some of the judges are from like Ubisoft. Like it was like the first time that we were like, oh well, dang, like we may actually know what we're doing a bit. So we continued to work on the game in between school and on weekends and whatnot. And eventually, kind of emboldened by these two things, we sent it off to Nintendo. And we were able to do that because one of the people I work with, Alex, who's our CEO now, actually had a dev kit already, because for his thesis project, he already was like, he was thinking like, I'm going to put it on the Wii U. I really want to put it on the Wii U. So I'm going to go get the dev kit ahead of time. So we had one already in the class that he had got. And as a result, we were able to put RunBow onto Wii U pretty easily. And so we kind of just sent it to them. We sent it to everybody, but Nintendo responded saying like, oh, wow, this looks really cool. Like, what are you guys planning? And blah, blah, blah. And we ended up talking to them. And they really liked the game. They felt that it had like some Nintendo-esque DNA, I guess you could say, or like was something they could see in it. And they were just starting up their Nindies program at the time as well, which is very fortunate for us. So for those that don't know, the Nindies is like Nintendo Indies. They're trying to basically get indie studios to make games for the Wii U at the time, and now the Switch as it continues, because one of the criticisms at the time was that the Wii U didn't have a lot of third-party games, so they were trying to get in indies to do that. So we got on board with that program. They took us to some events. We had some more positive feedback. We continued working on the game, and it was at this point where we were like, okay, we have something here. They're probably like a year or so from finishing the game. There's some government grants that we can get from Canada that really help out. Like there's the Ontario Creates is what it's called now. It was called OMDC at the time. If you can 50-50 match some monetary amounts, they just give you money. And then there's other ones like lending programs and whatnot. So we ended up writing a bunch of proposals for that, got the game funded, graduated, continued working on the game, and eventually launched in August of 2015.
Ooh.
And then from there, it just kind of becomes a whirlwind of game making, I guess. RunBow was successful enough that it kept us going, kept out the lights on and whatnot. We punched out a whole bunch of different ports. Eventually, starting our second project, Double Cross, and finishing that, and now beginning our third one. So that's kind of like that's the long-winded short version, I guess.
Well, that's not even long-winded. That's informative. And I really appreciate you breaking things down like this, because this is stuff that I'm curious about. Like, I love learning the ins and outs of how things work. So I greatly appreciate you going into detail about that. It's not rambling. Stop saying it's rambling.
It's just it's like, looking back at it now, there were, like, how people say, like, some things are just luck or whatnot, and like there is merit to that. There's definitely some aspects of luck to it, but there's also a lot of, like, just saying yes to things and putting, like, opportunities. One thing that we really emphasized as this whole kind of situation was going on was kind of like, we were actually talking about it before the interview, just asking, just going and just putting it out there and see, because, like, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. Yeah. But if you do, like, you might be surprised. So, like, Nintendo was a big surprise. We actually caught them at a good time. And then, we raised our hand. Like, we said, yep, we'll go to anything Nintendo wants us to do, we'll go and do. Like, whatever you're like, oh, are you guys interested in this? Yes. Are you guys interested? Yep, put us in it too. So that's how we did, like, the demo, the Nindies demo. That's how that came about. We ended up going to the NOA headquarters themselves to do, like, a lunch and learn with the staff there, which is a program they wanted to start, where it's like, as people that worked at NOA that may not be able to see some of the games that are coming out on the platform, it's like, here, like, you can come and just chill at lunch, and we're going to bring the devs in, and they'll talk about their game and whatnot, and how it kind of got created. And it's just kind of this really interesting opportunity. And then while we were there, like, things like, we actually have a little video with some of the staff members from NOA, and, like, Reggie is in this, like, promotional video for RunBow at the time, and it's just like, those things don't happen unless you just put your hands up or get yourselves out there for things. So
definitely,
yeah,
that's amazing.
It was a bit of a whirlwind, right? It's just not like, I can't. The reason I feel like I'm rambling is because I'm missing a whole bunch of details and other things that it's just a blur, I guess you could say. Like, there's just things just happen, and you're like, okay, this is happening now, cool. You just gotta keep going with stuff.
That just means that we get you back on the show again.
Oh, that's the hope.
Definitely, man, definitely. Like, and that's the other thing too. I want to ask, like, what is it like, working with Nintendo and other companies? Like, what's the inside scoops of that?
I mean, it's great. Nintendo is super supportive. They're pretty easy to reach most of the time. I mean, with the Switch coming out and being as successful as it has, it's not hard to predict that, like, they're now a bit more, what's it called? Like,
Selective?
Like, they're not being selective, but, like, they have more people trying to get their attention. So, like, a little bit, like, their responses are a little more bogged down than what they were at the Wii U, but they're still great, and they still get back to, I just whacked my mic. They still get back to us really great, and they're still very positive about the game, and they still help us out with a bunch of stuff. Like, they're echoing our, like, for instance, the Double Cross launch trailer. They posted it on their site, like, or on their YouTube. Like, they still help us out with a whole bunch of things. So they've been awesome to work with. And in general, I mean, the games industry, if you're doing the right things and you're taking yourself seriously and kind of trying to do what other people would agree is, like, the right thing to do, or, like, the proper way to do things, you get a lot of positive things. Like, it's a lot of really helpful people just trying to help each other out, because they understand how tough this industry can be to kind of stay in, I guess you could say, or, like, how because it can be tricky. You're kind of do big projects that need to pay off at the end, right? And if they don't, then it's like, ooh. there's no wiggle room for levels of failure, right? So it's a lot of banding together, it's a lot of camaraderie, and it's just it's just I haven't really had a negative experience with most of the people that we've talked to or worked with in the history of what we've done. And we've talked to a lot of studios, so it's all been good.
Definitely, man. I think with the current landscape of video game development, I think with a lot of IPs that have been coming out, it's I kind of feel like it's a bit harder to stand out now as opposed to like the 90s or the early 2000s. Like it's go ahead.
So go ahead.
No, that was it. That was the extent.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, there's a whole bunch of, like, you can go and look it up on the internet about how many more games are getting released like now than there were, like, even say when RunBow came out, like even like 4 years ago, right? 4 or 5 years ago. It's like 10 times the amount just in those times, just because game engines are now, free for the most part. They're way easier to work with. They streamline a whole bunch of different things. So if you have like a basic programming knowledge, you can put together basic games. And like, that's what's happening is there's a lot of people like trying their hand at it, and they're just like a huge amount of people flooding the marketplace with games and stuff, which is great, ish, for the most part, unless it's kind of like those the games that are clearly just like flipped assets or whatnot, or like they're not putting in the time and effort that you would expect. You know what I mean? There's a bunch of those. And I don't want anybody to stop trying. It's just like that's just what they are at the time. But it's definitely like having to think about not only like how do you make a good game, which is a big problem, or not a big problem, but like a big ask in itself. Like all the different components have to be syncing up. All the polish has to be there, animations and sounds and design and systems and blah, blah, blah. They all have to be working well to really make a good game. And then on top of that, you have to get people to care about your game, and you have to get people to know about your game. And you have to give them a reason to care. And it's not just like, oh, we made another one of these. It's like, oh, we made another like military shooter that's set in World War II. It's like, okay, there's like 15 of those, man. Like you got to do something else. It's like, so that becomes, especially with the project that we're working on now, actually, it's just interesting to see how much of like, as a studio, we've agreed that like we're confident that we can make a decent game, I would say. And now it's like, okay, but we can do better at marketing. We can do better at getting people more interested earlier on. In kind of like taking after what we see some of the other studios doing, like for instance, like Hollow Knights or Shovel Knight, or like those games that kind of do a Kickstarter and then just roll out a whole bunch of like updates and whatnot as they go. It just seems to be one of the ways to do it, but there's a whole bunch of different strategies. Like some people just cold drop a game out of nowhere, and people are like, oh, have anyone seen this gem? And like the fact that there's no marketing becomes a marketing of its own. Like there's just 1,000 different ways for people to approach this. So it's interesting to me because it's become such a focus, such a thing that we also now have to worry about, that it's really because of the landscape, because there's so many games launching. It's really interesting. It's always fun to have these new problems.
And I like the way you broke that down, because it really, like, even though it's a challenge, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm getting the impression that you like the challenge, that it keeps pushing you forward to do more and more and more. Yeah, that's one of the things that initially attracted me to making games, not just like playing them, but actually creating them. And one of the things that I think, as we spoke about, like the civil engineering wasn't really doing for me, is that it felt kind of figured out. You know what I mean? Like humans have been building things for forever, like thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We've got pretty good at it. And I don't want to demean the industry at all. Like it's a super, super prestigious thing, and like all the respect to people that do civil and structural engineering. But for me, it was like I wanted to make something from nothing, and like experience challenges that are completely unique to like what other people would have experienced. Like there was no roadmap for making a 9-player local multiplayer game where the core mechanic is racing and punching. Like that, there's no one that's like, oh, here's how you do that. Like just here are the steps. You go and you do this, this, and this, and then once those are done, you're good. You have the thing that no one's ever made before. It's like, so that's one of the parts that I find really interesting, is just having problems that maybe haven't really existed in this context before, and having to figure it out yourself.
that being said, there are times where I wish we had some more experience on the team. Like, as we all started at the same time, roughly, I think actually I might have the most experience on the team, but only because I had like two co-op jobs doing it. But that's it. Like, that's the most I have on anyone in the studio. So we're all pretty, like, we've all been learning and growing together. And there are times where I'm like, I really wish we could just have some professional, like some veteran of the industry come with like 20 years of experience and be like, all right, just do this, guys. It'll save you way. Like, just do this one thing. So that's one thing. But it is really fun to like have to adapt so often. Though stressful, it is also fun.
And what's the team like at 13 AM Games? Like, can you give us like a rundown of like the people you work with?
Like kind of like who they are, or like how the atmosphere in the office is,
both.
Or both. Okay. So, oh man, yeah. We have, so there's me. I do lead design stuff, which means like levels, game systems. Core game systems like combat or upgrades or level design, basic stuff. And then I also do a bunch of level design. So in something like Double Cross, I made all of Gootopia, I made all of the Thunderdome, and I made all well, minus the boss fights because that was somebody else. And then like the beginning, the tutorial and the outro stuff. So that's kind of what I do. And then on top of that, I do our finances because I'm technically the CFO, but I think that's just because I can work with Excel. That's how I got that job.
You're gonna have to teach me. I suck with Excel and I need it daily.
Then there's Unai, who is our narrative and technical. Was he technical director, or is he's narrative director and one of our programmers? I think he's. So he wrote all the story for Double Cross and things like that, and he programmed a bunch of the systems and whatnot for RunBow. He's from Spain or Basque country. He'll get mad at me if I call him Spanish. But he's a good guy. And then there's Justin, who does level design and some other design work when needed. He's kind of my co-partner when it comes to just making all the content, like the levels for the games. Then there's Alex, who's our CEO and creative lead from project to project. So he oversees kind of everything, make sure that all the different cogs are spinning the way they should, and all the different disciplines are aware of what each other are doing. Creatively, not like timelines and deadlines. That's somebody else. And he also goes out and like rings up new business and tries to get us other gigs and other projects and whatnot.
Nice.
And there's and I mean, I help with what is it? I end up writing a bunch of proposals. Him and I and our producer put together all of our proposals for all the various grants and whatnot that's out here, and pitches. And there's Steph. She does production, keeps us all on task, and she's a godsend. she keeps all of the basically all the wheels on as we go forward, and keeps us organized. And we have Marty, who is basically an AI. Is the best way to describe him. He is just a computer in human form. We joke that he needs software updates every now and then. Like he is more machine than man, but he's a really good guy. He's a really great programmer, and he is a wizard of machinery. And then there's Mike, who is our one of our hires. Actually, Mike and Steph are both the employees of the company. The rest of us all are owners, which is a weird dynamic in its own right, because it's weird to have 7 owners at the company and 2 employees, which is not a normal thing. But he's great. He's a programmer. He does. He originally hired on to do ports and whatnot, but he's really taken to UIs and things because I think we made him do it. Then there's the art team, which is Takashi, Sean, and Mike. And Takashi's the art director. He's responsible for like character designs and animations and whatnot. Sean did all of the world art and things like that. And then Mike helps Taka with animations and whatnot and other things. They kind of like all help each other out, and they're on the far side of the office, so I've kind of fallen out with what they do day to day now. But in general, like, it's just the great group of guys. We really feed off of each other really well. I haven't worked with a group like this before where it's just like so on the same page about the majority of things. Obviously there's friction because we're working in a creative industry and people have ideas and stuff, so working through how do we work through that is very important. But it's a really great place. I love working there, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Cool.
Well, that was a ramble.
That was not a ramble. What are you talking about?
That's good. I mean, I don't know. We play we pull pranks on each other all the time. We play Smash Bros. At lunch almost every day now, with the new one out, and we just basically take the piss out of each other all the time. It's great.
Oh man! So I mean, speaking of Smash, is there any possibility some of your characters might be? I know you probably can't talk about it.
I mean, no, I can because there's nothing to talk about. No, I don't think that's going to be a thing for RunBow or not. I don't think we are quite there yet in terms of like clout, I guess you could say, or like pedigree or prestigious. Like I don't think we're at the same page. Like Shovel Knight, for instance, was a way bigger game than RunBow, and it just got a trophy. So that's kind of like where the bar's set. And I don't think like it would be an honor. It would be amazing. Like I'd love to see like Hugh or Val or Satura in Smash Bros. And I'd love to see like a RunBow themed level where stuff was disappearing and reappearing. Mm-hmm. But I'm not hoping, like I'm not keeping my hopes up. I don't think that's going to be a reasonable thing.
You never know. I mean,
you never know.
Shantae got in there, so
that's true. Yeah, and back to what I said. Maybe we should just send an email and ask.
Do it.
Maybe.
Oh man, so speaking of RunBow, like it's a super popular series. Like I said before, many consider it a cult classic. Are you surprised at like the level of success that it's achieved over the last few years?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's always surprising how it's done and how much people have really enjoyed it. Because like for me at least, it's tough to look at that game and just see it for all of its good things, because it was our first real title. We had made a couple small things in while we're going through the college program, but this was like our first real game where we actually dedicated all this time and effort and whatnot into it. And because it's my first kind of like game like that, it's tough to look at it and not just see all the faults in it. Imagine you're like a carpenter and you build a table, and it's the first table you've ever built, and then like 5 years later you go back and look at that table, you're gonna be like, what the hell was I doing?
Okay.
There's so many things you could have done differently, right? So it's tough for me, but I love seeing everybody's reaction to it, and I think that we hit something there that people are looking for, that people enjoy, and I'm really happy to have done that. And it always takes me away when people are like fan art and like, oh, like we want to do a tournament, or like, oh my like somebody told me that their sons put like he almost said like hundreds of hours into the game, and I was like, how? I was like, how could you do that? That's awesome, but like, what? That's crazy to me. So it's super humbling to see that, and it kind of pushes me to like, if everyone's so jazzed about that, it's like, I can do better than that now, and I just want to do that. And I feel like Double Cross is a step towards that, but I see even with Double Cross, it's tough not to be critical of your own stuff.
It's really hard not to,
yeah.
And I think that as as a creator and artist, that's always a challenge. Like people can be like, oh man, this is the most amazing thing ever, and you're over here like, that was off. I could have done better on that. That's the part that I think a lot of people don't realize. And it's like if to relate it to everyday people, there's something in their personal life that they're really good at, and they probably, other people would praise it, and then they're nitpicking it. For those of you listening and watching, there's always something like that.
Always, and it's especially true because, I mean, we worked on RunBow, I would say probably for about a year. Mm-hmm. I mean, give or take. There was some time at the beginning, time at the end. But like the core release of RunBow was about a year of development. Mm-hmm. And during that whole year, you're just sitting there making stuff and critiquing it. That's all you're doing for the entire year. You're playing it, you're adding to it, and you're critiquing it. So like things like whatever level people are playing, they're like, oh, this level's great. Thank you so much. It's like, yeah. I'm really glad to hear that. I've played that level 60 times, and I've like made tweaks on it for like 3 days straight. It's just like things like that like you won't, like I can't appreciate it like they will, obviously. Like there's just no way, because it's just, you're so close to it and you've just spent so much time with it. Like I have thousands probably not, well, maybe not thousands, but like over 1,000 hours in Double Cross, just playing it. A point where like I don't even have to like think about things anymore when I'm playing. You just kind of like go on autopilot because there's not enough game there for thousands of hours. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's always an interesting experience to see the difference between what you think of something and like how people are perceiving it. And it's always super great.
Definitely, man.
Unless it's negative, but then you know something to learn about that.
You know, and again, I want to thank you guys for allowing me the opportunity to get an early copy and review Double Cross on this Switch. My review, actually, I think by the time this podcast is up, it should be out already. But
I hope it's good.
This game, you know, and I'm not like when it comes to reviewing games. I've taken the Andrew Rayner approach. Like I look at it objectively. And I've seen a lot of, you know, other content creators, other YouTubers, other journalists that can be ultra critical to the point where anything positive, it's like it's just white noise. Like there's no way you can even capture the positiveness of a game because they spent like 20 minutes or so bashing it. And I watched some of those. you know, like I try not to take that approach because I think for me, you know, growing up as a gamer, I can see good in every game, even games that are horrible. But this one, like, I had literally no complaints other than I want a sequel.
Okay. That's awesome.
You know, like, it literally, like, you know, I'm not trying to pander or anything to you. Like, I'm being serious. Like, as I was playing it, I'm like, there's nothing wrong. Like, I can't think of anything wrong. Like, of course, there's that one level I kept dying on in the arcade where you've got to use the sling mechanic to not hit. Oh my god! I kept dying, and I was getting mad, and I'm like, okay, this is old school challenge. I love it.
Yeah, there's like, so when I was making that, the idea was to just make these infinite kind of mini games, right? Mm-hmm. And it was because we work on a grid, kind of speak, right? So the game is broken up into game units, like Unity units, basically, and we work on a 0.25 grid, so you like a quarter of a unit. And the gap that I had to make for that, it was in this weird spot where if I made it bigger, it became trivial, and if I made it a little too small, like it became impossible. So like I tried to find this middle ground, but like I've been watching people's plays of that level and just watching people stream it and whatnot, and like based on what you just told me, it's a little frustrating, and I can understand that. It's a little tight. That being said, in that specific thing, the record in the studio I think is like 171 barriers, which is insane. It's not my record either. I was blown away when someone told me they did that. I was like, there's no way. But it's things like that, right? Like, so I spent probably 4 or 5 days just making arcade in general. I don't know, more than 4 or 5 days making arcade in general. Way more than 4 or 5 days. But like maybe 2-3 days just on that one instance of that thing that you just called out. And it's just like, I can't, it's so hard to like predict how people are going to experience, because I've seen people fly through it their first try and be like, oh, that was too easy, and then I've seen people like really hit the wall with it and go like, oh, this is impossible. I'm like, there's no, you can't please everyone.
No, but it really took me back to the NES and Super NES era of gaming, when basically it was hard and you figured out the pattern and you just adjusted on the fly. Right. And so I appreciate that aspect of it. Like, that took me back, because a lot of games nowadays they hold your hand on a lot of things, and that did not hold my hand, and I'm very grateful.
Well, that was like the old school kind of like design methodology back then. Was they were still kind of coming out of making it for like cabinets, like arcade cabinets, where they want you to die because then they get more money. So there was like. And as a kind of direct result from that, it's like those games teach by failure. Like you will not be able to beat things your first try unless you're some sort of superhuman, because you have no idea what the hell it's about to do. And then it does it, and you go, oh. And then the next time you get there, you're like, I know what you're going to do this time, and then you beat it. And that's kind of like old Mega Man games do that.
Yeah.
Like I remember the guys were kind of chirping me because I hadn't played the original Mega Man stuff yet. And so they sat me down in the office and made me play it, and I played through. I'm going to get it wrong. I think it was the fire guy with the disappearing and reappearing platforms like RunBow.
Oh,
but there's no telegraph.
Yeah,
There's nothing.
none.
No warning whatsoever. So the platforms just disappear or reappear, and you just have to know where they're going to be, and you don't know until you've played it. So I was just sitting there getting like super frustrated, and they're just dying laughing at me. They're like, you made something simple. I'm like, no, we put telegraphs in. That's just fun little things like that.
Oh, man.
That kids, or not kids these days, I'm going to sound like an old man if I say that, but like gamers in this generation of games like have kind of shied away, which I'm kind of thankful for. Like there are games that aren't super hold it, like they're games that have got it right. Like there's this nice middle ground between hand-holdy and crush you without you ever getting to experience the thing until you get crushed by it. And then I think, like, for instance, we were talking about Breath of the Wild. I think Breath of the Wild does that really well.
Yeah.
There's things like it teaches you some basic stuff. You get off the plateau and it's like, like there are parts of that game where you just get destroyed until you figure it out. And it's like there are moments where you're rewarded for like really thinking through a problem. It's like that's what I really like to see at least.
Definitely. So I also wanted to ask you too, like, since there's been the collaboration of Shantae and RunBow, like, how did that come about? Did your team approach Matt Blazon and wait for it, or how did that?
So they were one of the kind of last studios to kind of work that arrangement out with guest characters. That's obviously why Shantae's like a DLC, because she wasn't part of the game at the beginning when we originally launched. But I think we approached Matt after getting all of the or we approached somebody Wayne Ford and then we're directed to Matt after successfully getting kind of the rest of the cast together. So like getting Shovel Knight, like Scram Kitty, Guacamelee guys, blah blah blah, like all of those guest characters. After we got all those, it was kind of like, oh, and like after the game came out and it was like, oh, then like Shantae became a discussion, and it was really cool, and they're like super awesome to work with. I mean, they're particular about Shantae, which is good. They really care about how Shantae is represented and things going forward. So it was a fun challenge to kind of work through to make sure that like our art style was being recognized, but also their desires for the character were still being held up. It was really cool. Yeah, that's basically how that came about. Kind of like reaching out after all the other things had been kind of nailed down.
Cool.
That makes sense.
And going back to like Double Cross, of course I've been praising this game a lot this podcast, and I don't care if the audience is getting sick of it. You need to go out and play it. I did a giveaway. I gave away 2 Steam codes for the game because it's just phenomenal. I was shocked. During I think my live stream, I gave away 2 codes, and I was people came through on Twitch because I'll tell you this: Twitch is an interesting beast because before I want to say last year, before I redid my Twitch layout and everything, I was lucky if I got 1 person watching.
Right.
So it's like, okay, if I stream on YouTube, then I can get anywhere from probably 10 or sometimes even 100 people watching.
Wow.
When I streamed Double Cross, it got up to like over 200 people. Like
really?
I think.
Wow.
I hit 198 at one point,
yeah.
And then when I looked again, it was 230. Then it went up to 258, and I think it peaked at 260 something.
Wow. Was this on YouTube or Twitch?
It was on Twitch. And I was like, I was shocked. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, that's shocking.
And so that's when I decided to do the giveaway, and people came through for it. I was like, wow, this is really amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, we had, the studio, there were some people Twitch streaming during the day. What's it? The Mighty Ruhan and God, I'm gonna get his something Sin, some German guy. I'm gonna forget their names. I'm really sorry if you're hearing this, but thank you. But they were Twitch streaming during the workday, and I think a large part of their audience was actually just people in our studio watching them. And I'm not sure how it registers different viewers from the same IP. I'm assuming it doesn't. But there were about 8 or 9 of our computers were all watching these people. So to hear that you were, and they were at like 5-6 viewers or something, I think was was the peak I saw, or 10 maybe. And I was pretty happy about that, or like interested to see that. But 250, like, wow. I did not know that was happening. I would have tuned in for sure. That's crazy.
It was insane. Like, I've never seen that happen before, and I was wondering. I'm like, is it the layout I selected? Is it the tags? Like, what got it? That much exposure, and I had people resharing it. I had a lot of people saying, "Yo, this convinced me to buy the game," and I was like, okay, I did a good job.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate all that.
Like, even now, like, I'm looking at the views because I streamed it 2 days ago. Oh wow, YouTube peaked at 830 views in the first day.
What?
Wow,
that's crazy.
Okay, I will be streaming that some more then.
Awesome. Yeah. Please do. No, I have a vested interest in this.
So, let's see.
Wow.
With Double Cross, like it being such an amazing game.
Thank you.
Like creating a new IP, like creating that IP. Like, what were some of the things that inspired you with the mechanics? Was it? Because, you've got a lot of things. You got the level progression, you got the upgradium system, you got brawler aspects with emphasis on combos and juggling, you got the proton slinger with the slingshot mechanics, you got the wall jumps, wall clinging, and sliding down from, like, Mega Man X and the Mega Man Zero series. Like, there's so much to say about how great this game plays. But, like, in your own words, like, what helped you and your team to narrow down, like, what would be the core gameplay mechanics of it?
So I would actually just, like, first, like, just to preface all this, I would think that if I said that we had narrowed it down, people at the studio would just disagree with me. And I would kind of disagree too, because it does feel like there is a lot going on, which is one of the criticisms we received as well. So
really? That's
always interesting. Yeah, that's definitely one of the things we've heard. Which I think there's merit to that too. As much as, like, some people really like this combination, there's some people that don't. But it's hard to pinpoint exactly how we did all that. I mean, I'll talk about the sling mechanic first, and then I'll kind of try to get into the other ones. But the game actually started much differently. I actually programmed the original prototype back in January of 2017. Okay. Yeah, January 2017. And it was a game about magnets more than anything else. And you were this little dude, and you could throw out 2 different magnets, and when they hit stuff, they would give it, like, a polarity. And then you yourself could hold these magnets if you wanted to. So you could throw one out and keep one, and then, like, you would polarize, so to speak. So you could push yourself, pull yourself. You could pull things, push things together. And we were playing around with it, and, like, that's kind of where the game started. That was, like, when we pitched all of our ideas, that was the one that people were like, oh, there's something there. So we started working on it. And one of the things that we ended up realizing was, like, this it was really interesting mechanic, but there was a lot of it was almost like too much to make one game about, if that makes sense. Like, it was almost too intricate, or, like, there's too many steps that we think, like, maybe the average player would probably try to pick it up and be, like, way too complicated for them. So we kind of toned it back, and we're basically trying to reduce, like, what is really fun about this, and kind of pinpoint that. One of the things that kind of stuck around was, like, this idea of, like, slowing time to kind of land your shots. Was something that we really enjoyed. Like, there's some really nice organic feeling to that. And also this idea of, like, player movement. So, like, pulling yourself towards things was a big one. So eventually we kind of sat down and said, okay, to simplify design away from, like, having all these intricate player mechanics and, like, offloading onto the level, so to speak, how could we, what could we do? So we kind of adjusted the mechanic to be the first bits of what you would see the kind of the proton slinger being now, which is just this time slows, you aim, and you pull yourself and tether towards it, kind of like Spider-Man-y-esque. And from there, with that kind of solidified, we began coming up with level design gimmicks and whatnot that would kind of play around it. While this was also happening, we were also playing around with the idea of non-linearity kind of in levels, because we wanted to give the player some agency and come up with I think inspired by Breath of the Wild, actually, because this was around that time. We saw how that game just kind of let you do whatever, and really liked it. And we were actually talking about like, how can we do that? How can we do that in like a platformer? How can we give the player this much agency without being just like a Metroidvania, which kind of tries to do that, but Metroidvanias for the most part are actually quite linear when you break them down, because there's usually only a couple ways to actually beat them. So we wanted to make something that was truly kind of like non-linear, and we originally started with like, not only could you pick the 9 levels at the beginning, but you could also go and just fight the bosses if you wanted to. And obviously, like, we had to come up with mechanics and build like, okay, but if you go and do the other 3 levels first, like maybe the boss gets easier. And so we played around with that, eventually settling on play the 3 levels, do the investigation, and then once you finish that, you can actually unlock the boss. Spoilers for people that haven't played. That's kind of you would have figured that out. That's not a big one. But so that's kind of like how those 2 systems kind of come together. And then because of the nature of doing non-linear design in levels, you can't really, because they can pick any of the 9 levels in any order, you cannot assume that they've played any other level before playing the one that they're about to play, if that makes sense. So each level is a fresh start. Could be a fresh start. Could be the first level that they pick. And in order to make it like actually be non-linear, that actually had to be embraced. Like, you couldn't be like, well, this level's way harder, and if they pick it first, they're just gonna die, and like that's what we intended. So instead, like, we'll encourage them through failure to go and find the actual level they should start with. No, we actually wanted it so that you could start wherever you wanted. Obviously, there's degrees of difficulty that come with mechanics that like we tried to control, but I think for the most part, if you wanted to, you could pick any level and reasonably get through it. I don't think there's any level that's hard stop, way more difficult than other ones, besides maybe arcade, the thing you were talking about before. Besides that, I think the main problem for that is that was the first arcade game that you touched. But anyway, that's besides the point.
It's still great, people. Still, even with the challenge, there's a lot of variety in the arcade level. Like a lot of variety. I love it. Anyway, sorry. I interrupted.
So like each level is kind of like its own self-contained thing, right? So you have to introduce the mechanics to the player in a way that makes sense. Then you have to escalate them, like, classic design stuff. You show them A, then you show them B, then you show them AB, then you show them AB but more difficult, like kind of like the golden standard of how to do things, how to teach a player organically. So each level had their own little, like, we tried to come up with 2 mechanics for each level, 2 to 3, and like combine them in this way. And then that's the levels form that way. What other systems? Combat originally was going to be much more simplistic. Like, we had it almost like Mario style, where you could like bounce off people's heads, and that would do damage. But Alex was very insistent that we should have like a deeper than normal kind of like combat system, like more than like Shantae, for example, which is like you just flip your hair and hit stuff, and a little more than like Mario, which is booping people. So we looked at something like Guacamelee for inspiration, or like is it called Ace Combat? I keep referencing, but this is this really fun, really good combat game that you can get on Steam that Alex was showing everybody, and like some other retro games that he had played. And
I was gonna ask, like, if it's inspired by like Double Dragon, or even there's a just really good brawler on Steam called Fight and Rage. If you love Double Dragon, Final Fight, Streets of Rage, this game is amazing. Yeah,
and that's one of the big strengths of having Alex on the team, is that he's played more games than probably any other person I know. He's just played a whole bunch, and so it's always interesting. And they're usually older games that most people wouldn't play, and so it's really good to pull those references. But there was this insistence that like there should be a kind of combat system, so we were working it out, and that was probably the most iterated on of the 3 things I've mentioned so far. So like it started out as something way more complicated, then we pulled it back a bit, then we added some depth, then we pulled back a bit more, and I think where we settled on now is kind of like the best version. I still think there's some things we could have done to improve it, and there were things that got chopped, which I think looking back would have, I think maybe we had a bit of we should have reprioritized there. obviously there's always going to be things like that whenever you're done working on a project for like a year and a half. But like we had, for instance, there were some combat abilities that actually used the tether more than it does now, more than just picking up and throwing. Like you could actually grab somebody and like spin them around. And enemies used to be like, if you did enough damage to them, you could actually then grab them. But then it became this like, we had some technical issues and some basically just time basically got away with us. We were a little too much scope for what we had, so some things had to obviously get cut. But that's kind of like where these ideas kind of started from and how they morphed into where they are now. The same can be said with the investigation system. It was originally going to be a bit more involved, but we were worried that because it was tied to gameplay progression that we would lose people, and we didn't want to necessarily lose people on such a core system. So we made it so that you couldn't really miss the secrets, you know what I mean? Like, but there's still an element of having to figure it out tied to it. It's not just given to you. In retrospect, again, this is another thing where, like, when you were asking me, like, looking back at RunBow, this is me now looking back at Double Cross, I think there would probably be a little more we could have done with that system as well. But again, time, budget, and not seeing it at the time is definitely contributing to why we didn't. But yeah, I mean that's as much as I'll talk about those things, I think. It's a lot to unpack there.
Hey, we appreciate it on the show. Like we love to get into the nitty gritty of how things work. So I greatly appreciate it. This is giving me a new perspective and paradigm on what goes into like the mechanics of a game, the design and everything. Like I really appreciate it. Thank you for that.
It's a lot of iteration. It's a lot of playing something and being either how do I make that better, or how do I stop this bad not fun thing from happening. You know, like it's a lot of that.
Okay. Yeah, all right. You know, and we're down to like the last 3 questions, and I actually don't even want to stop talking, but anyway, for the sake of time and respect to your time as well, so we're gonna go ahead and get into the last couple questions. So with like, given how successful Double Cross has been in just the last week or the last 3 to 4 days, you could say,
right?
Are we going to see like a future title? Will this become a series? You know, I've said before, like I personally would love to see a Shantae Double Cross collab.
Right.
It would be awesome. I mean, given, you got the whole concept of the multiple Earths and the multiverse plot, so there's so much creative freedom that you have. Like, what are your thoughts?
I mean, for us, the game is still fresh launch, so we're waiting to see exactly what kind of numbers it's moving, like how much of a success we're thinking it's going to be. Because I mean, that it is a big part of being an indie studio that's kind of like making new IPs and trying these things out. We are beholden to how these things perform, and especially like if it's not well received, which I'm kind of seeing that it's not going to be that case, but if it is for whatever reason, you don't want to like overcommit to things, but there's definitely an interest, as there is kind of with RunBow, to go back to the games that we had made and make a sequel, or talk about making a sequel, and seeing what kind of what we could do and what we could do to make the game not just like the same but more, but like something, genuinely move the sequel kind of like forward. So depending on how it does and what kind of like once I don't know what to call it, but there's like this general feeling once you're done working on a project for like a year and a half and you start on a different project, it just feels way better than starting a different version of that same project. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a palate cleanser. Like when we launched RunBow, nobody wanted to make another RunBow. Like now everyone's like, no, everyone's done with this game. Like we need to work on something else. We've been working on this for too much. But now, like if I were to go and not talk to the guys at the studio, people are like, like we're open to the idea. Like actually, I think there's a lot of cool things we could do. And it's like it doesn't like that kind of has to wear off. Like the project fatigue almost has to wear off. Personally, like for all the reasons you're saying, like it's definitely ripe for this kind of thing. I mean, we've set it up where a sequel could be as easy as 3 new dimensions and a new antagonist, and boom, like you're in. Like there's not a whole lot. Like we've really left that open for this opportunity. So and I think we'd be foolish if there is such a good reaction to it. Right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that's on the table, but there's a whole bunch of constraints and things that would have to be checked off before work on it would really start.
Okay.
Right. If that all makes sense.
Yes. Hey.
So I'm trying to be like as non-committal but as explanatory as I can be.
Hey, it works for me. So like, are there any other projects in the works that you're allowed to speak on?
There are, but I'm not allowed to speak about them yet, unfortunately. Though I do think that there'll be something soon. Okay. Like, I think we kept Double Cross really close to our chest for a long period of time. Like, we were working on it for a while and no one knew what it was or what was going on until a bit closer to the end of it. But I think with this one, we're going to be a little more open. I'm not promising anything or committing to anything because obviously things can change at a whim's notice. But I think the idea with this one would be to try to be a little more open with the actual development. So keep your ears tuned if you're interested, but I'm not sure. I can say more than that.
All right, and I guess the last question is, like, what advice would you give to our audience here that would be interested in getting into video game design and the gaming industry as a whole? Because I don't think there's a set path. Well, it's not really a set path in much of anything outside of medical.
Well, I mean, like a lawyer, you go to university for it, and then you go and write the bar, and then you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
Like there are, like some of them there is, but for this one, like I don't know, it's tricky to say. Like it depends largely on what type of person you are yourself. Like for instance, I knew that if I wanted to do this, I had to commit to doing it. I had to go and like basically submerge myself in like-minded people in the industry, like go in full ham and see if it's something, because I'm not the type of person to kind of do this on my own. Like a lot of the advice out there is like, oh, just start making games on your own free time and see if you like it. And that works for some people that can do that, can like write out plan goals and say I'm going to work on this project for this amount of time and really see if I get into it, or if they have enough free time that they can just do that full time and see how it goes. But for people that need to be surrounded by other people to really kind of like get going, I would recommend like a college program or something like that to see how it is, to get some contacts in the industry, to meet other like-minded people. Because the other big thing about the games industry is that it's extremely collaborative. Like no one, like there are people that solo develop and whatnot, but the majority of games are made by big teams of people that all have to communicate and work together and all fill each other's gaps in terms of like skill sets. So it's definitely good to like get into that. You don't have to do a college program. I mean, here in Toronto, there are several events or like weekly, monthly things where you can go and meet people. Like it's like little game industry meetup. Obviously, something like that. If you just go around bugging all the developers about like getting a job and whatnot, you're going to get a little bit of a cold shoulder because most of them don't want to talk about work when they're there. They're just there to like talk about their friends. But it's one way to do it. It's one way to meet people. And then, I mean, the advice of just making games holds true. I mean, there is a very, very, very big difference between, oh, I really enjoy playing games and, oh, I really enjoy making them. Like it's a very, very, very big difference between enjoying the final product and actually getting it to be the final product itself. There's a completely different skill set, completely different kind of, what's it called? Skills. Skill set, yeah, sure. I said that twice. I couldn't think of the second one. So if you can, I would suggest making games. Going to a game jam would be a great one too. Also, there's so many different avenues to get into gaming. Like you can go anything from like visual arts to sound design to game design to even like business things or accountants or what have you. Like if you just want to work in the industry, there's tons and tons of different ways you can do that and tons of different kind of professions and skills that you can pursue to do so. But for game design in particular, I would say you have to really, really want to do game design. You have to have played a lot of games, and you need to kind of learn about or understand kind of like a creative process that works for you. But that's, I mean, as vague as I can be while trying to help it takes a lot of like looking at exactly how you learn and how you think you would be able to do it. There's no golden rule for it. And the games, like the college programs and whatnot, are also filled with people that love playing games but don't actually want to make them, but they're there anyway because they think this is how they do it. So don't be one of those people either. Like, you really need to think about it because it is a very different skill set. It's like the difference between like I like sitting on chairs to I like being a carpenter and making them. Like it is a big difference. If that example was a bit too trimmed down, maybe, but I think everybody likes sitting in chairs. I take that.
All right. Well, when are we gonna see you out here in Hawaii?
Oh man, I'd love to go, but well, that depends. A lot of things are tied to how well this does, like how much vacation I'm going to take. But yeah, I think Hawaii is definitely on a stopping block. I think that'd be great to go out there. One of the guys we used to work with, one of the founders of the company, he loved Hawaii. He actually was out there, I think, twice while we were working because he loved scuba diving and whatnot, and he was just glowing about it. So it's definitely on my list of places to go.
Definitely, man. Like I said, if you ever come out here, I'll give you the locations of all the food places because
sounds great.
It's kind of why I don't cook anymore because I'm like my wife,
why would I do it when they do it so much better?
Right? I can just go and get this, and I don't have to spend a lot of money, and it's like it's so delicious. Like, oh, my goodness. Oh, okay, I'm getting hungry. Clearly, I'm getting hungry right now.
It's about that time.
Yeah. It is. Well, and I got one last thing to say. I lied. I have one extra question for you. One last question. So, did you have fun?
Yeah, always. That's always the goal. It's always the goal is to have fun.
All right. And Tom, again, like, where can people find you?
I'm a bit of a recluse when it comes to social media stuff, so I don't have a Twitter, and I use Facebook once a decade. But you can find the company and all that good stuff and at 13am Games, Twitter, Facebook, and our website 13amgames.com. Yeah, you can find us all there, and we're usually, if there's a Twitch stream and they're streaming Double Cross, I would imagine that there's at least one or two of us lurking in there.
Cool.
I'd put money on it.
I'm probably going to be streaming it some more today. I actually just bought it for the Switch just because I as much as I would love to stream on my computer as much as I want, or just play on my computer, because of constantly traveling, I just need that portability. But it's on sale, people, as of this recording. It is on sale on the Switch. It is, I believe, in the U.S., it's $14.99. So definitely take advantage of that. You will not at all be disappointed. As Kasanova approved. I love it. Love it. I highly recommend it. I think all my friends I've recommended to have bought it, and they're singing praise of it. So
awesome.
Definitely, people, go out and buy that. And if you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast, you'll be able to catch it not only on YouTube, but also on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio. We're coming to iHeartRadio in a couple days, maybe a week or so. I'm not too sure. Still going through the process. But we're going to be up on Sirius XM Radio within the next week and a half or so. So we're getting out there, and
it's awesome, man. Congrats.
Thank you. Again, Tom, it was a super honor having you on the show. I enjoyed talking with you, and we must get you on the show again. You have a friend in Hawaii. You definitely have a friend in Hawaii.
Awesome. I'm honored. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and with that being said, people, we will see you on the next one. Did you enjoy this episode of the Kasanova Podcast? Well, I hope you did. And if you did, please make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe. And let us know what we can improve upon, what you liked, what you didn't like, and all that good stuff. And just make sure you always have a good time. That being said, this is your boy Mekel Kasanova, Hawaii's favorite YouTuber. I am signing out, and I'll catch you on the next episode.